Welcome to the show. I'm Ryan McNiece, and this is the Scholar Series. We're here at Gonzaga University School of Law with Dean and Dr. Jacob Rooksby. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you, Ryan.
With the beginning of any school year, and especially at Gonzaga Law, there's always a plethora of opportunities and challenges. What are some of those opportunities that you see coming up this year?
Well, we're excited to have students back in the building, of course. It's been a little quiet, as it is in the summer with their departure, although we do have an accelerated JD program, so we had some students with us. But as we get back into the school year, we're looking for some additional programming that is going to be available for our students, both in the law school and some of it out into the Spokane community. So that's exciting.
That's a big piece, I believe, is the engagement with our community, whether it be the business community, the healthcare community. Speak to that a bit.
Certainly. So there are a lot of sectors in Spokane that I think can benefit from some of the programming that we have to offer here at the law school. So we're going to be looking for ways to partner in new dimensions with folks in the healthcare realm, for example, intellectual property, business. Some of that will entail programming that we offer to the community on site. Some of it might be things that we offer here that we're inviting folks to come into the building and to get a little bit better sense of who we are and what we're doing.
And that's not necessarily degree-based, but also potentially certificates, correct?
Exactly. So the real future of higher education, I believe, and I know others share this belief, is in providing different kinds of education, not just degree-based education. So some of our other schools on campus have already been leaders in this. For example, the School of Leadership has done a remarkable job at putting on certificate programs. So we're talking about new ways that we can partner with some of our colleagues across campus, whether it's in the leadership school, the business school, or even putting it on ourselves to offer educational programming that maybe lasts a week, a weekend, maybe it's a couple times a month over the course of several months, something that looks different than your typical 2 or 3 year experience in a classroom.
And Dr. Rooksby, definitely worth noting, your background is unique in the sense that not only you obviously the dean and from an administrative standpoint, but also tenured professor with a real passion for intellectual property, and also hold a PhD in higher education theory. So from my perspective, that confluence of multiple aspects of how you approach legal education presently in the future really is a passion and a big part of the scholarship of yours.
Thank you. No, it definitely is a passion, and it's something that I draw on, I think, weekly, if not daily. Higher education is undergoing some dramatic changes, as I think many people know from reading news headlines. Gone are the days of, for state institutions getting major earmarks from the state legislature, and for private institutions, we are in competition with one another for students. And so this means we are facing some difficult questions, all institutions are, on a semester by semester basis. I find that really exciting because I think it's an opportunity for us to innovate as an institution and find new ways to reach wider audiences. And so just to give you some examples of that, our team has done a phenomenal job here at Gonzaga Law School of reaching students where they are on social media. Higher education institutions are slow to change, and it is often the case that they are behind the curve when it comes to new technologies and really what's out there in the marketplace today. So just in the past couple of years, we have hired essentially a digital technology specialist and brand manager who's helping our admissions team and other components of our operations really meet students where they are on social media. That's often the first place students are going to look for information about potential law schools. So we want to make sure that we're helping get our message out there in the best way that we can.
Well, and I think that's a part of having the opportunity to sit down with you today is having individuals understand the scholarship of faculty, of the administration, of the dean, here at Gonzaga Law. You've obviously had opportunities, whether it be through William & Mary, University of Virginia, at Duquesne as well. What stood out in terms of the opportunity of being here at Gonzaga Law?
Well, a lot of things, and one is certainly the Jesuit identity and mission. The other is this is a name brand institution with national and international recognition, and the chance to come here and to lead in that environment was an incredible opportunity for me and my family. I also have the utmost respect for our faculty, and I know as part of this series that you've talked with some others, and we'll be talking with more in the future. Scholarly work is at the heart of what we do here at Gonzaga Law School, and it may not be the first thing that most potential law students think about as they're looking into their choices for law school.
It's a good point, but it is significant.
But it's crucial. It's very significant because really there's a scholarly community out there among law professors, and their impressions of other law schools help create and reinforce national rankings. And so as we think about, and we've had great upward momentum in the past years under my predecessor, Dean Jane Korn.
Absolutely.
As we can think about continuing some of that momentum, really investing in scholarship is fundamental to that plan, to that enterprise. Because as you may know, U.S. News and World Reports, these things, these publications put out information, and a lot of it is based upon reputation. Reputation in the legal community, reputation among judges, and actually law professors. So they will be sent surveys to opine on different programs and how they think they compare to one another.
And understanding the actual diversity of that scholarship, I would agree, is immensely important. And understanding that here at Gonzaga Law, there's a significant diversity of that interest area, scholarship, publication, all over the board.
Absolutely. And the other facet of this is that scholarship informs teaching. So the best teachers are drawing on their own scholarship in the classroom, and they are engaging with other scholars in the field in their teaching. So this is about, it makes us as an institution have more renown, but it also leads to a better educational experience for students.
I think that's a good point, and I had a great experience here at Gonzaga Law, and I think the point that you're making is you can have scholarship and you can have teaching, but oftentimes at a law school or other institution or university, you don't necessarily combine those. And
right.
I think at this institution, you have the scholarship in the classroom from a teaching perspective.
Yeah, it's not an either or, it's a both and.
Right.
And
That's a good way to put it.
Before I had the dean's position, I would always chuckle when other lawyers, for example, would see me in the summer and say, oh, it must be nice to have your summer off.
Right.
And of course, the reality is, yes, classes may not meet in the summer, and many of our colleagues are not teaching in the summer, but what they are doing is doing the hard work of scholarship during the summer. And that often means long and lonely hours in one's office or in the library, reviewing cases, doing research. And really, this is why so many of us got into this field to begin with, because many of us come from practice backgrounds. I was a practitioner. I was an associate at a large law firm in Virginia. And in practice, you may come across an issue through representing a client that really interests you. But the reality is, once the case is over, the case is settled, you're no longer being paid to study or pursue or find the answer to that issue. And we have as our mandate that we go where the research takes us. So that's, I think, the beauty of higher education and why so many are impassioned to become scholars and feel very strongly that it's a part of their job.
Give us, on that note, give us an understanding or a better understanding of the different areas of scholarship, whether it be law reviews, books, and we will touch on this, but you yourself are the author of The Branding of the American Mind, How Universities Capture, Manage, and Monetize Intellectual Property and Why It Matters. So this is your own book, but this is just one form of scholarship. Books, law reviews, various publications.
Treatises,
give us an idea of the hierarchy of that.
So this book, its antecedents were really in law review articles. And law review articles continue to be the coin of the realm for law professors. And so everyone, when you join higher education, you're expected to put out publication in the form of a law review. Every school, as you may know, every law school has usually at least one law review. Some have different specialty journals. So these are 50 to 60 page articles typically on a particular issue. And I'll give you an example. This was really kind of started the formation of this book for me. I had a research assistant my previous institution, and I was interested in learning how many trademarks colleges and universities owned. And many that I talked to said, you know, they're going to own some registrations for their name and their athletic logo, but that's going to be about it, right? So there's really not much to that project.
Right.
Well, as we started to get into the project, it turns out what I thought was going to be a very small undertaking turned into a multi-month endeavor. and the findings were not what we expected. Had I been in practice, right, there would have been no need for this research, right? No client would be paying me to find out the answer to how many trademarks do colleges and universities own. But in engaging in this multi-month project, we found the findings were quite surprising. So I ended up writing a law review article that was published in Harvard's IP Law Journal. And that, that type of publication, a law review article, 60 pages, other law professors are going to read that, and it raises the esteem for that person, but also by affiliation, the institution, because people start to say, wow, scholars at that school are publishing these kinds of articles that are getting placed in these high-profile journals. But that doesn't make necessarily a big splash in the practicing community or to other audiences. So
credibility of the association with that particular journal.
Well, exactly. But what I'm getting at is that then there's opportunity to do smaller works. So many of us will write a law review article, for example, and then put together an essay that's based on that law review article. And just to speak to my own personal experience, for this article that I'm mentioning on trademarks in higher education, I wrote then a smaller 1,000-word essay that was published in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And it was essentially telling what the findings were of this longer article, and writing it in a way that was more journalistic and engaging for the reader. It did not presume that someone was a trademark specialist or IP attorney. This reached a much wider audience in higher education and reached people who were in a position to make decisions regarding these various things. So then that led to follow-up phone calls and media inquiries and other things where one's name continues to get out there. But what began that process was a law review article.
And what does that do for whether you're writing for Gonzaga Law in our own law review article or as a dean or a professor here at Gonzaga Law? What does that do for Gonzaga Law?
Well, it's instant brand recognition and credibility. The more our brand is out there in the scholarly community, the more we're going to rise in the collective esteem of students, alumni, everyone who's concerned about the future of legal education.
Well, for instance, as you just described, a 60-page article of your own in the Harvard Law Review, that's significant. That's critical.
Yeah, and that's just one piece of the puzzle in terms of law review articles. We have faculty writing chapters in books. We have faculty writing treatises, which is particularly hard work because that means essentially reading all of the cases that come out and all of the legislation that may be on the books in a given area of the law, and writing and trying to synthesize what's going on in that area and then provide that work to others essentially as a desk reference to make their job easier.
Assimilate it essentially into a pragmatic tool.
Exactly. And again, if you think about would anyone in private practice be paid to do that kind of work? Absolutely not. No. Right? So it really is a service in many instances to both the scholarly community but also the practitioner community.
Would you say a significant amount of your writings were the precursor to the book?
I would, and so that's actually how this project developed. I had written probably 3 law review articles, all dealing with the same theme of intellectual property in higher education. I had no grand plans to write a book. And then actually I was at a conference and someone suggested to a publisher that the publisher speak with me about a book contract because they said, well, you have 3 or 4 articles in this area. That could be the backbone or foundation for a book.
Right, could be starting structure.
Exactly, and so I sort of reluctantly talked with the publisher because many academics don't think that this is a big undertaking and I don't know if I want to sign up for it. He convinced me that I could do it, that I would have the support from the press. And so that's really kind of what led to then thinking about writing this in book form. And again, law review articles are written primarily for legal academics, sometimes judges, and sometimes practitioners. I wanted to reach a broader audience with the book.
I think you're making a good point in terms of the distribution channels of the respective media, whether it be the law review, whether it be a book, because I'd imagine this is on Amazon.
It is on Amazon, thank you.
No, I'd imagine it is, and that is a whole different type of distribution channel for particular work. One article specifically that sticks out to me is Chapter 6, In Pursuit of Brand, Names, Domain Names, Images, Slogans, and Secrets as it relates to higher ed and universities. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, thank you. That's actually one of my favorite chapters in the book because it kind of pulls together some threads of things that people may be familiar with, but they don't see how all the pieces actually fit together. And so that chapter looks at how higher education has used things like domain names, trade secrecy, the naming and branding of certain aspects of their identity, and how are they harnessing the potential of these things. So I give some examples in the book of, I think, practices that make sense and practices that leave a little bit to be desired. And so I'm of the opinion that higher education is a sector that serves the public good. That's why we're here. We're talking about scholarship. Many of these things are a public service in many ways. And that's why higher education receives some of the subsidies and tax breaks that it does. There's a problem when I believe higher education starts moving too far in the realm of activities that look just like any other for-profit endeavor. We're not for-profit, right? So we have to be careful in how we approach some of these opportunities that may, in fact, rely upon intellectual property or brand or some of these other things. So I give examples in the book about some institutions in the realm of domain names that have filed contentious arbitration actions against people who own domain names. I mean .com, .net, .org, that incorporate their trademark. And in one example, an institution found that an alum had registered a domain name, and it was a .com domain name. That they didn't like the speech that was going on at that domain name, so they filed an arbitration action. Or they file it against local businesses that might have some name in it as well. So it's really kind of threading together how higher education puts itself out into society as a business, and what are those ways that are appropriate, what are those ways that might not be appropriate.
I think it's a critical piece of the puzzle, and I find it fascinating. For instance, when you talk about these universities having IP, intellectual property that most individuals may recognize, one that comes to mind is Texas A&M with the 12th man.
Texas A&M is a great example. University of Alabama is another. They have been
what
really
are some examples?
out front in protecting their intellectual property. So Bear Bryant used to wear a fedora on game day. He is long since deceased. Some students created a brand that they called Houndstooth Mafia. And it was modeled after the fedora that Bear wore on game days. And the university took the position that that was an infringement of their trademark.
That's Bear Bryant.
That was Bear Bryant. Even though they had not actually marketed anything related to the houndstooth pattern of his fedora.
But they potentially used it in commerce.
Exactly. They at one point in time had put a sticker on some helmets for one game only, where it kind of harkened this fedora that he wore. And so they took the position that this was an infringement and that the students had to give up the company, which eventually they did.
That's interesting, because I like how you're explaining the juxtaposition between corporate America, everyday for-profit type organizations as it relates to universities.
Yeah, let me give you another example, and this involves students and free speech and the drinking culture that goes on at some institutions. West Virginia University has as its motto, "Let's go Mountaineers." And some enterprising students put out some t-shirts that were in the school's colors that said, "Let's go drink some beers." University didn't like that. They felt like it was encouraging binge drinking. But at the same time, it used no registered trademark.
Didn't use the actual words.
It did not. It used Mountaineers. It did not use West Virginia University, but it did use the colors. Now, the students made the point that those colors, blue and gold, are the official colors of the state of West Virginia.
And the reference to the phrasing, if you will.
Yeah, so why can't we use those colors? And the university took the position, those colors bring to mind the university and therefore are something akin to a trademark, and you can't use it without our permission.
So here at Gonzaga, you are the dean, and a lot of administrative functions obviously come with that. How do you parlay your expertise, your background in scholarship to the classroom, whether it be through other faculty or yourself? Well,
I want to set a message for our faculty and for our students that scholarship's important. We believe in it here. Our faculty are doing it in a wide array of different areas, and it's to our collective benefit. So I signal that message in different ways, one of which is by keeping up in my own area. So my background, as you've pointed out, is in intellectual property and also higher education law. I continue to edit a treatise on higher education law, and I'm putting together another book involving intellectual property actually right now. So I think those are some simple things that I can do to kind of signal that this is important to us. The other thing is I know you've talked and will be talking with some of our colleagues who are very active in this realm. Professor Pearson, Professor Gilmer come to mind.
Absolutely.
I do everything I can to try to showcase our faculty and the great work that they're doing, and making sure that our community knows about that, making sure that other members of the legal academy know about all the great faculty that we have here and the work they're doing.
Well, and Jacob, you spoke to this earlier in terms of engaging the community, bringing the business community, bringing the law school out to the business community or vice versa, as well as the healthcare community, and having them understand what is going on here at the law school and vice versa. That engagement, I think, is important, and you've already done that to a significant degree, as you mentioned, with social media, with the outreach, making the law school accessible to individuals outside the university itself. So well on track to fulfilling that goal. What do you foresee in the upcoming years in legal education as a whole, some of the challenges to overcome?
Well, I think the challenge for legal education is to break out of the mold of how it has always been structured. So the history of higher education involving law schools for many years were these cash cows that were viewed as having a license to print money for the rest of the university. We can always get more law students, and they're always will be willing to pay full price, and that money can be used to cross-subsidize other aspects of the university's operation. And it's because of that feeling, and this was, again, nationwide, you had many new law schools open because universities said, gosh, we want one of these law schools that can print money.
Right, we have our main university.
And then within the university, law schools often got set up as different, right? Different rules applied. They didn't have to go through the main university for some of their requests. They were allowed to have their own types of employees that weren't responsible to main university administrators. And so there were few economies of scale, one could say, that were really kind of, this was by design. Law schools said, leave us alone, let us do our thing, we're doing a great thing for you.
Some
universities.
autonomy.
Right, we want our autonomy. That's the historical mold. Some law schools refuse to believe that the tides have changed, right? Some believe that, if they're facing enrollment difficulties right now, you know what, in 2 or 3 years from now, things are going to be like they were before. And I believe the reality is the whole profession has changed in dramatic ways and will continue to change. And so law schools need to start thinking of themselves as being of service to the universities of which they are a part, right? Not as separate, standalone actors that march to the beat of their own drum.
But that certainly is a turn on the dial.
That absolutely is a turn on the dial. And you have many, I think, law professors at some institutions and deans who came up through legal education during these halcyon days that I'm discussing and really still think that, once again, things will be like they were.
It will right itself. If
exactly. And I'm here to say that the train has left the station, and law schools, including this law school, we are working actively to become part of our university in all the different ways that means. And to our great benefit, this university has a wonderful reputation, and this makes ample sense for all involved to come closer together, right? Because there are synergies, there are economies of scale, there are things that the university is doing that we can harness to the benefit and advantage of our students.
That mutual collaboration.
Absolutely, and not all law schools are so lucky.
No, and you touched on this earlier. Past dean, Jane Korn, did a wonderful job of really sticking to credentials in terms of LSAT scores, which that number continues to go up here at Gonzaga Law. Yourself, you've really put a focus on what that next class is going to look like and continues to build upon itself.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned my predecessor, because it's a classic example where she was faced with some very difficult decisions and did not compromise on admissions standards when we started to see some market recalibration, economic difficulties, fewer people deciding to take the LSAT, which would enable them to go to law school. Many law schools said, well, we're used to having over 200 students each year, and we rely on that revenue because our university needs that revenue.
Well,
so
that
we're going to
really
lower
is,
our
yeah.
standards in order to get 200 students a year. And here at Gonzaga Law School, we did not do that, and that's a direct credit to my predecessor.
Absolutely, and I remember those difficult decisions because that really was a tipping point, if you will, economic issues nationally that weren't just specific to Gonzaga, but were a national issue that affected all law schools, all higher education, graduate schools. But when you were looking at applications for graduate schools and law schools specifically at 50% reduction, Gonzaga really did stick to that Jesuit mission of providing a legal education for the whole person and sticking to those standards, which has played out to their benefit.
Absolutely. One stat that I think really, one statistic that puts this into perspective is nationwide in 2016, we had the same number, in real number, of law students as we as a nation did in 1980. The difference is there are 20 additional law schools in 2016. So that just paints a picture of the changing market and dynamic, and it has become more competitive all around. What excites me is we're in such a great position to compete and exceed and excel in this environment. We're already doing it.
I think the community here in the Pacific Northwest, as well as in the nation, is, I would agree, is in a spot to really support Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga is positioned in a perfect spot to really push this university and this law school forward. Dr. Rooksby, I appreciate you being here with me.
It's been my pleasure.
I look forward to seeing how it goes here at Gonzaga Law.
Thank you, Ryan.
And thank you for joining us on the Scholar Series. Talk to you next time.